Only 6 cars started the race. Indianapolis 2005 stands as one of the most embarrassing moments in modern motorsport history. Not because of a crash, not because of bad weather, but because 14 out of 20 cars refused to race. Michelin, one of F1's 2 tire suppliers at the time, discovered a catastrophic problem. Their tires couldn't handle turn 13, the banked corner leading onto the main straight. Ralf Schumacher had already crashed heavily in practice when his left rear tire exploded at nearly 200 miles per hour. Michelin ran tests overnight and realized the tires were failing due to the combination of the banking and a recently resurfaced track. They told their 7 teams that the tires were only safe for about 10 laps at racing speed. 10 laps out of a 73-lap race. The teams begged the FIA to install a chicane to slow cars through the corner. 9 out of 10 teams agreed. Indianapolis Motor Speedway president Tony George agreed, but Ferrari refused. The FIA backed Ferrari. No chicane would be built. Race day arrived, and over 100,000 fans packed the grandstands expecting a proper Grand Prix. The cars lined up on the grid. They completed the formation lap. Then, as they came around to start the race, 14 cars peeled into the pit lane and parked. Only 6 cars remained. Ferrari's 2 cars, Jordan's 2 cars, Minardi's 2 cars, all running Bridgestone tires. The crowd went ballistic. Fans threw bottles onto the track. They stormed the ticket office demanding refunds. Police were called in to maintain order. The race went ahead with 6 cars. Michael Schumacher won. Rubens Barrichello finished second. Tiago Montero took the only podium of his entire F1 career in third. By lap 10, most of the crowd had left. Thousands demanded refunds. Michelin later reimbursed ticket holders and bought 20,000 tickets for the following year's race to give away as compensation. But the damage was done. F1's reputation in America was destroyed. The race limped on for 2 more years before Indianapolis dropped F1 entirely. The sport didn't return to America until 2012 in Austin, all because of a tire problem and political stubbornness, the most farcical race in F1 history, and it happened in front of one of the biggest American crowds the sport had ever seen, a race with no racing laps. Spa 2021 redefined what it means to call something a Grand Prix. Rain had been falling all weekend, but race day brought biblical levels of water. The formation lap was delayed. When cars finally rolled out behind the safety car, the spray was so thick drivers couldn't see anything. After 2 laps, race director Michael Massey red flagged it. The rain never stopped. For over 3 hours, fans sat in the grandstands waiting. The clock ticked down. F1 has a 3-hour window to complete a race. With less than an hour remaining, Massey made one final attempt. The cars rolled out again, still behind the safety car. They completed 2 more laps at reduced speed, crawling through rivers of standing water. Then Massey threw the red flag again. Race over. Here's where it gets strange. Because the cars completed more than 2 laps, the FIA declared an official result. Max Verstappen, who qualified on pole, was declared the winner. George Russell, who qualified second, scored his first ever F1 podium. Lewis Hamilton took third, all based on where they qualified. None of them raced. Not a single overtake. Not 1 lap of actual competition. Just parade laps behind a safety car in conditions too dangerous to race. And they all got points for it. Verstappen received 12.5 points, half points, because they didn't complete 75% of the race distance. Russell got 9 points for his first podium without actually racing for it. The backlash was immediate. Drivers called it a disgrace. Hamilton said fans deserved their money back. Carlos Sainz said he got half a point for something that didn't happen. Fans felt cheated. They'd waited hours in the rain to watch 2 laps behind a safety car. F1 changed the rules afterward. Now, races must complete at least 2 laps under green flag conditions for points to be awarded. But in 2021, the sport awarded a race victory for the shortest race in history. 3 laps total, 0 racing laps. A podium ceremony for a race that never happened. Spa 2021 will always be remembered as the day F1 called something a race when it was anything but. The world champion who pushed his car. Jack Brabham's 1959 title win is the stuff of legend, but not for the reasons you'd expect. The championship came down to the final race at Sebring in Florida. Brabham arrived with a slim points lead over Sterling Moss and Tony Brooks. To gain an advantage, Brabham and his team boss decided to run the car on minimal fuel. Lighter car, faster lap times. The gamble almost worked perfectly. Brabham led most of the race. His teammate Bruce McLaren sat in second. Then, on the final lap, disaster struck. Brabham's car began to sputter. the engine died. He was 400 yards from the finish line, out of fuel, coasting to a stop on an uphill section. McLaren swept past into the lead. Maurice Trintignant went by. Tony Brooks passed him too. Brabham was sitting in fourth, watching his championship slip away. But there was a loophole in the rules. You had to cross the finish line to be classified, but it didn't say how. Brabham climbed out of the car in the baking Florida heat after racing for over 2 hours and started pushing. He pushed that Cooper Climax up the hill, across the line, and collapsed on the tarmac next to his car. He lay there for 15 minutes, completely spent, before someone handed him a Coca-Cola. McLaren won the race. At 22 years old, he became the youngest Grand Prix winner in history, a record that stood for decades. But Brabham's fourth place was enough. Brooks's third wasn't sufficient to overtake him in the points. Brabham won the championship by 4 points. The image of him sprawled on the ground next to his car became iconic. The only driver to win a world championship partly on foot. He'd go on to win again in 1960, and then in 1966 driving a car that bore his own name. But nothing topped the drama of 1959, running out of fuel on the last lap and pushing the car home to become champion. You can't script that. The only posthumous champion. Jochen Rindt never knew he was a world champion. The Austrian was killed at Monza in September 1970 during practice for the Italian Grand Prix. His Lotus suffered brake failure approaching the Parabolica corner at over 200 miles per hour. The car speared into the barriers. The impact was catastrophic. Rindt died before reaching the hospital. He was 28 years old. At the time of his death, Rindt had dominated the 1970 season. 5 wins in the first 9 races. Monaco, where he forced Jack Brabham into a last-lap mistake. The Dutch, French, British, and German Grand Prix. He'd built a massive points lead, but there were still 4 races remaining. Ferrari's Jackie Ickx could still catch him mathematically. Lotus withdrew from Monza out of respect. Ickx won. Then Ickx won in Canada. The championship was tightening. At Watkins Glen, Ickx needed to win to keep his chances alive. He finished 4th. That sealed it. Rindt's points total was untouchable. He became Formula One's first and only posthumous world champion. In November 1970, Jackie Stewart presented the championship trophy to Rindt's widow, Nina, at a ceremony in Paris. Rindt had been one of the most naturally talented drivers of his generation, known as the king of Formula 2. Aggressive, fearless, spectacular to watch. His Lotus teammate Graham Hill once joked that every time he was overtaken by his own wheel, he knew he was in a Lotus. The cars were fast, but fragile and dangerous. Rindt had said before joining Lotus, "At Lotus, I either become world champion or I die." Both came true. His death, along with those of Bruce McLaren and Piers Courage that same year, pushed F1 towards serious safety reforms. Stewart and others campaigned for better barriers, medical facilities, and driver protection. Rindt's legacy lives on not just as a champion, but as a catalyst for change. The only man to win the title without being alive to receive it. A championship won in the most tragic circumstances imaginable. The driver who raced without qualifying. Hans Heyer holds one of the strangest records in F1 history. At the 1977 German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, Heyer failed to qualify. He was driving for the struggling ATS team and simply wasn't fast enough. Under normal circumstances, that would be the end of it. Go home, better luck next time. But Heyer decided he'd come too far to just leave. On race day morning, amid confusion on the grid and issues with the starting lights, Heyer quietly slipped out of the pit lane and joined the race. He started from the pit exit, unauthorized, in a car that hadn't qualified. For 9 laps, nobody noticed. Then, his gearbox failed and he retired. Only when officials checked the timing sheets did they realize what had happened. Heyer had 3 things next to his name that no other driver in F1 history has managed. DNQ did not qualify, DNF did not finish, and DSQ disqualified from a race he wasn't supposed to be in. He was also banned from the next 5 Grand Prix as punishment. Heyer's F1 career consisted of 1 race, a race he didn't qualify for, didn't finish, and was thrown out of. The only driver to achieve that particular trifecta. He went on to have a successful career in touring cars and sports cars, but his 9 unauthorized laps at Hockenheim remain his most famous motorsport moment. The man who raced in F1 without permission and got caught. The race that ended in the pit lane. Michael Schumacher has won races in almost every conceivable way. Dominant from the front, comeback drives from the back, strategic masterclasses, but the 1998 British Grand Prix at Silverstone might be his strangest victory. Late in the race, Schumacher was given a 10-second stop-go penalty for passing under the safety car. The problem was, he didn't serve it it immediately. Ferrari weren't sure if the penalty meant 10 seconds added to his race time, or if he had to physically stop in the pits for 10 seconds. The confusion led to Schumacher staying out on track, still leading the race. By the time Ferrari figured out he needed to serve the penalty, it was the final lap. Schumacher was still in first. Mika Hakkinen was closing in second. So Schumacher did something no one expected. He stayed out on track, crossed the start-finish line on the final lap, then immediately dove into the pit lane. He served his 10-second stop-go penalty after crossing the line. The finish line at Silverstone is positioned before the pit entry, which meant Schumacher had technically finished the race before serving the penalty. He won in the pit lane. While Hakkinen crossed the actual finish line thinking he'd won, Schumacher was stationary in the pits, already classified as the victor. It's the only time in modern F1 history that a race winner took the checkered flag while sitting still in the pit lane. Ferrari's quick thinking and knowledge of the rules turned a penalty into a win. Schumacher called it one of his most satisfying victories, not because of the driving, but because they outsmarted everyone, a win that technically happened before the final corner. The fastest lap set through the pit lane, Donington Park, 1993. Ayrton Senna produced one of the greatest drives in F1 history in the wet. He started fourth and was fifth by the first corner. By the end of the first lap, he was leading. He lapped almost the entire field in the rain. But here's the weird part. On one lap, Senna set the fastest lap of the race, not on the track, but through the pit lane. The pit lane at Donington runs parallel to the main straight, and Senna used it to avoid slower traffic. He came off the racing line, dove through the pits at speed, and rejoined ahead of the cars he was lapping. The time he set on that lap, including the pit lane detour, was faster than anyone else managed on the actual racing circuit. It's never happened before or since. A fastest lap set partly through the pit lane. Only Senna could pull that off. The race is remembered as his greatest wet weather drive. But that pit lane fastest lap, that's pure Senna genius. The race with 25 lead changes in one lap. Monza 1971 produced the closest finish in F1 history. 5 cars crossed the line within 0.61 seconds. Peter Gethin won by 0.01 seconds over Ronnie Peterson. Francois Sever was 0.09 seconds behind. The race featured 25 lead changes, constant slipstreaming, pure chaos. But here's the strangest part. The lead changed hands so many times on the final lap that timing officials struggled to keep track. 5 cars crossed the line almost simultaneously. Gethin's win was his only Grand Prix victory. He retired from F1 shortly after. But that finish? That's immortal. The tightest finish ever recorded. You could cover all 5 cars with a blanket. Modern F1 with DRS and dirty air could never produce a finish like that. Monza 1971 was pure, unadulterated slipstream racing. The kind of finish that makes you appreciate how wild the sport used to be.